Well, hello and welcome to PM Express. And today we are looking at 998 presidential staff. Huge number by all accounts. But how do we arrive here? Political recruitment has been one of the things which we use to pay for those who fund the party and those who do the legwork for the party. When the party comes into power, you need to find a way of recruiting them. So you go into the police and they complain about political recruitment. You go into the army, it's the same. Fire service, it's the same. Any recruitment that sort of get payment from the government, and then whichever party is in power will push their boys there. Even national security is swamped with people who help the party one way or the other. The nation itself is secondary. And here we are. President or the presidency is saying that, well, 600 odd people were already there. We just brought out 200. I'm sure when they go and somebody else comes, well, you all know there was 1,000 there. I only brought 200, and the number will be going to 1,200. And who knows, 20 years from now, probably have 5,000 people all swamped in there doing one thing or the other. But how do we stop political recruitment? Because the nature with which they get into power, by the time you get into power, some people will have to be paid. Unless you and I think that there's Father Christmas syndrome or Father Christmas going on somewhere, there will be payback. And that's what we are all suffering. Because at the end of the day, our taxes go to pay these people. Our resources go to pay these people. And so here we are with people up north struggling to even get a motorbike to go and give birth. And down south, you know, we have 1,000 people all swarmed in the Flagstaff House. God knows what they're doing. But political recruitment at large, how do we solve this problem? Because whether we like it or not, it seems to be here with us. And it goes all the way down to even people who take tolls on bridges, people who take tolls at public convenient places. Everywhere has become a political payback time. So when the party changes, even receptionists and gate men will change. Well, that's the matter on the table today. When I come back, I have somebody who has in-depth knowledge on good governance to discuss this issue. Don't touch the dial. My name is Nana Ansakwa, the fourth Chief of the Little Republic of Akwemwe Dumasa. When I come back, we're looking at political recruitment. Thank you for staying. My guest tonight is Dr. Akwetey, Executive Director of IDEC, and he knows a thing or two about governance. So this falls right in his jurisdiction. Doc, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you. My pleasure.
Doc, we are starting with 998 presidential people working at the presidency at all levels. And then we're looking at political recruitment at large. Well, that's how come this number keeps exploding, because everybody comes and you need to pay one or two people. And so, well, let's just add our people, let's just add our boys. Is it, here to stay with them? But that's the truth. I mean, is it, are we stuck with it?
Not in the long term, because, public reaction in a democracy also changes things. If you followed Armenia, they had this man who served twice as president, wanted to be Putin, Vladimir Putin, so he wanted to be prime minister. And it's been quite an authoritarian state, but the people came out and said, no, term limits are term limits. You can move there to the side. And then this evening he says, I'm gone. So there is a way that democracy also evolves. It's the voice of the people, really. And as people begin to assess the mandate they gave, how is it benefiting them? What is being used for? Is it solving their problems? Is it giving them a better quality of life or not? They begin to demand. And come as we move closer to elections, politicians are different persons. You see how they go on their knees begging and so on and so forth. So at some point, the spotlight will be on an issue which then presented, through the media, presented the people, they'll air their views. Do we accept this or not? And that then tells you that at some point you have to change that practice, you know. Now, I can't tell exactly when this would happen, but certainly I think we would like to know, for example, that huge number, what are they doing? If you were to define specifically job description and duties and roles and so on, could a lesser number do the job and so on or not? And so it's going to lead to some kind of rationalization at some point. I can't tell when exactly, but certainly you can say this is what it's going to be. And when you look at other systems, for example, you saw how President Trump was struggling to get clearance for his son-in-laws, and you know, those are things that will come to us at some point too.
Are we too slow to change, or the normal pace, the human reaction? Because I don't know, are we too slow to change?
We've been too slow to change because I think it's also in our nature. You know, we know something is wrong, but we wouldn't do anything. We'll talk and leave it until some person comes and says, yes, I think I'm going to do it, take it forward, and then we clap for the person and so on. So we look for the person who would fix the problem. We are not able to determine at a very early stage, you know, who can fix this problem, and why don't we? Because we don't build consensus. In a democracy, you don't have all the numbers. When you're running an authoritarian regime, you're able to make decisions swiftly. You remember when President Rawlings, I think somewhere in the mid-90s, you know, there was a rally that he held the Constitution and says whatever he wants to do, they tell him he can't do this document, and then he flipped it, you see, because when he was chairman of PNDC, he could quickly make decrees and so on and so forth. In a democracy, you can't, you don't have that, especially if it should go through parliament and you don't have the numbers, and you know that people may like it or not like it. So sometimes there's also this fear that if I do things that are not popular, or a certain number of people do not support it, they might vote me out. I'll lose the vote. The politician always has his eye on the vote when making tough decisions. Would it resonate or not? But I think with time, with Afrobarometer and others, we're also beginning to be able to quickly measure what the public mind is and in which direction it's going. So there are dynamics coming up, changes taking place, but in terms of efficiency of democracy, in terms of how after elections we run our economy, how well we manage it, how well we grow the economy so we have a bigger cake, you know, to take care adequately of the needs, basic needs and others of people, and raise the living standards, you know, and so on. We are entering that phase because we feel more stable around the electoral politics. Reforms have been done since I think it started around 1994 when IPAC, you know, was put in place. And after every major presidential or every presidential parliament, there's some kind of reform. The parties will sit and talk and discuss with the Electoral Commission, and then some reforms will be made. And so with time it's consolidated. So if you're looking at multi-party now, I think it's done well on the election issues. Much better than we did in the late 50s after independence, in the 60s, then in the, you know, the short republics of the second and the third period. We were totally intolerant of multi-party. We think it wasn't good for us. Union government of, you know, NRC, SMC time and so on. And if you compare it to what we have now, we've been able to manage to reform and to change the modus operandi of multi-party politics as it was in the years gone by, in the decades past, to something that we are able to work with. We are managing our problems within it. We are not satisfied, but things have not also exploded, gotten out of control. If we are afraid of electoral violence, we act within the same constitutional framework and the rights we have and so on to engage and say, no, we want peace. And eventually they listen and so on and so forth. So that's what we have done. But we are increasingly dissatisfied with the quality and the scope of accountability. how we are using public resources, how we are governing our institutions, public services.
Could that be basically votes to vote? We are okay at the voting, but in between, could that be how it is that we get these votes that is causing the lapse in between, where it is too expensive, or negative influences in how it is that we get the vote, and therefore within the 4 years, some of the decisions that we take within the 4 years are pretty strange, for want of a better word.
Well, it could be, but I think you have to look at it this way. There is nothing automatic about the mandate, that because we elected you, we have expectations and we have assumptions. But governing and managing an economy and growing an economy and responding to the needs of people with money, resources, whether you're borrowing or increasing taxes or mobilizing them and so on, the efficiency, that kind of activity after elections is completely different from mobilizing votes. You see, because development is something that you cannot achieve anyhow. You need qualified people of all sorts. There are procedures, there are laws you have to comply with. There's a time you have to deliver it, because within the interval of 4 years, you have to show results and so on and so forth. And that's why, in whether it's democracies or authoritarian regimes, public services are extremely important. This is where you have a certain critical mass of the most qualified people. The architectural engineering services, clearly, what have, you may ask, or you might put the question, what have architects got to do with government? But of course, government needs architects to invite them on the housing projects they want to undertake, the approvals that are required and so on. You need engineers, you need lawyers, you need economists, you need administrators, you need a multidisciplinary team of people and so on to be able to use their knowledge and competencies to translate those broad policies, what is in your manifesto. They would look at it and translate it into specific concrete steps that would be taken practically to solve a problem. But they are well trained, they are constantly trained. They are people who come in with high qualifications, and they must maintain a certain standard, so increasingly they are going out for causes and participating in conferences and so on. So when you see a public servant, he or she is a person who would look at the broad language you had, that this is policy. Our policy is to provide free senior high, and he will start working it out. How much would this cost? How long would it take to implement this? How many people will be affected? Where is the money? Can we generate it? All these analyses would also come from them. Okay, so you need to value competence to do with this. And you must also have competence in your own party to be able to engage those institutions and direct them. And that is where you begin to see the gap. Okay, the development mindedness of our party is not as strong as the elections they should win. Okay, and the interest in policies
that's very profound. The development mindedness of the party.
Oh yes,
it's not as strong as
it's a phase. It's a phase. I mean, we focus so much on the stability, you see, and the elections, that we must improve the confidence in the electoral process, the mistrust between us and our colleagues, how would the EC, and so EC assumed a certain huge profile in our politics. In some countries, you don't even see them. They're invisible. Okay, but here, because that stability, the competition and so on. But when you move from there, you also see that we designed a constitutional framework that said that the so-called winner takes all, Article 55(3) says political parties simply can't participate in local elections, and therefore they cannot be elected into local government. And so you either go to parliament, and in parliament, if you're a minority, you have your say, others will have their will, And so we created a system where the parties really have been kept out of getting into the grounds where they will solve our problems, living with the people in the rural communities, in the local areas, and thinking through the solutions people want, educating them, even just finding out what is it that would improve the quality of life. Otherwise, they are not going to get their vote and so on. And so these are things that we're still lacking. We haven't gotten, we've concentrated so much on election. Let me give you an example. Our president is announcing new policy initiatives, and some are huge things. Have you heard the governing party speaking policy, leaders, and so on? Forget about the ministers or the vice president and so on. The party itself, where is its development content in terms of policies and even affirming what the president is saying and quickly beginning to educate people? Take resource mobilization. We need more resources. We want, people should be paying more taxes. We have to educate people on what taxes can be used for. It cannot just be GRA's job. The party that has so much to do within a short time must get involved in that, in educating people, the electorate, their supporters, and trying to get many more to comply with government policy. Have you heard them talk about it? It's more about the elections, securing victory in 2020 and beginning is it the regional or the local, you know, the lowest cell, the elections and so on. So the president sometimes, when he's, you know, stated the policy and outlined it, the political force that would also get disseminated effectively, the party doesn't do that. But we expect NCCE or some other group, civil society should. But the party is a very critical force for development, accelerated development, transformational development. The state power we give to them when they is huge and enormous. It's not just for elections. So you have this dichotomy where the party is just looking on the ground and calculating how we win. And then the president has to depend on his ministers and the bureaucracy. And then in the language of the party and elections, you find out that it now becomes really who are our supporters. We have to win the election. See, we don't care and we don't respect competence so much because there's so much mistrust. Did they work with the other party? Are they members of that party?
Let's come back to this presidential staffer thing.
Yes.
To go away. Now the party said, well, when we came, there were already 600 odd people, so we added just 200, and it blows up to nearly 1,000. What would they do? Should they work with the 600 they came to meet, or bring theirs? I mean, who has the 600 in any case?
Yes, who are the 600? But the 600, assuming they are public servants.
Yeah.
Chief directors, and various levels of people in the civil service who've been posted there to work with the government and with the president are the people you should work with. As a matter of fact, the machinery for the president to deliver his policies, translate them into goods and begin to solve problems across all sectors is the civil service. Yes, that is the state employees. They have all the different kinds of competences. But a party would also want to, there are certain political issues or areas of interest where they will still bring people, maybe with party color, but with a lot of competence. I mean, if you look at some of the ministers in their own right, with their backgrounds and so on. So, but hardly would they outnumber the civil servants. But the other thing too that makes them work together is that there have to be processes of building trust. The idea that you're a civil servant who went to the now I almost said Flagstaff House, but Jubilee House, and they worked with the predecessor president or the immediate past president, and because of that you can't trust them. I mean, how do you deal with such an ideological thing, so blinding? But it also defines the agenda the parties have. If you're looking at a president with a very serious developmental mission, he wants to work with people with competence who can give him the results he needs. Results, doers, and so on. And they are trained people. They can do it in Accra, they can do it in the regions, they can do it in the districts. Then when he wants to move there, the party say, hey, these are not party members. They did not work with us. They were not in the trenches. So you can't, then it slows down the process. He has to negotiate or probably not negotiate and so on. Because our political parties are at the moment not developmentally focused. You know, that's not their big agenda. They want to grow our economy and sustain it maybe at 10% for the next 20 years and say, look, we want to build a certain capital base and begin our investment to industrialize. Beyond aid, we can't depend on aid on this, but we have things that aid will do, but we want bigger things to happen. So let's work. How do you work? You have to convince people. You have to talk to them. You have to educate them. You don't have to look at party color. You are going to look at competence and integrity, ability to do things. But at the moment, it is difficult to do that because the party says, the party members, so long as I campaign for you and my payback is immediate, it's not for you to, you know, create more jobs so I can get some work to do. Immediately, I should come first. And you heard the party, the governing party, some of the officers saying constantly, we would look after ours first. But their first job actually is to expand the cake. You know, because the responsibility to govern, you are governing for the whole country. Look at the oath the president takes. He is not to discriminate against any Ghanaian, but he is to work for everybody. He is our president. And forget about people who would see him as, oh, he belongs to people. Once he gets the mandate, which he got not only from his party and is sworn in, he is the president of Ghana. You must give him all the respect and the support for him to deliver. And I think we ought to put pressure on that. But fortunately, for us in IDEG, you know, we've been working a long time in looking at this problem.
Are we saying that we have no choice but, you know, to stack with this size of presidential staff?
No, I mean, the changes would come with time. And I like the public questioning. What do we need them for? What is the productivity? What is the growth coming from them? What is it they're doing that other parts of the civil service would not do? In the current context, there is too much suspicion and mistrust. In fact, there is suspicion and mistrust between the politicians who are elected to govern and ab initio, the civil servants. Because sometimes because they worked with the previous government, or also because how past governments appointed people. If we are all agreed that we're using the laid down procedures for recruitment and its competence, you go through this process, you pass the exams, you are interviewed, you are best, you are assessed annually, you are the most competent person, and they have to agree on that. Unfortunately, we've had this old story of how our politicians and our civil servants, you know, disagree. There's some conflict which we haven't resolved. And it started a long time ago. I mean, probably Nkrumah resolved it by getting into the late 60s when the army came, or the short republics, and then you saw that people are laid off because the civil service they are the defenders of the state and its functions, and they have long-term tenure. And I think attempts to sometimes tell the politicians, you can't do this, you can't do that, it's not tolerated very much. It's, hey, he's going to sabotage, let's get him. Then you have the other aspect of the problem that we have to deal with, okay? The parties at the moment think once we are elected, we have our agenda. This is our money, and that's what we are going to push. So they want to control the state and do not accept limitations on their power within the existing system. Now, to change that, it means that the parties themselves have to assess how much they've achieved in the last 25 years, taking this approach, and whether their achievements have even been sustainable, and so on. But the heart of the matter is that it is a contested issue. No one party can solve it. So you have to, it's one of the important issues, just like electoral reforms, that you must get parties around the table facilitated to agree that you need the professional public service, and you need to look at how public servants cross over into politics and how civil politicians cross over, and how do we show this? Because we need that professional, impartial public service or public servants, selfless or rendering selfless services. But now everybody says, hey, for survival, they play politics, or some of them are corrupt, or they lead politicians for their agenda. They want a chief director who is loyal to them. What is that loyalty about? So it's the agenda they come, and I think that they come with. And I think that the agenda on the table most of the time were financed.
I was just coming to funding, but before we go to funding,
yes.
We're always complaining about this cake that's been shared, this meat that's been chewed to the bone, and yet still we keep expanding, creating regions, creating districts, more MPs, more. I mean, are we able to sustain it?
It's unsustainable. It's unsustainable because, look, democracy is not just about voting and getting power. It's about using the power, okay, to increase growth, the cake. The economy must be stronger, and you must be able to produce, industrialize your trading. So we're getting more money, and you're meeting the aspirations of people. Quality education, the quality. When foreign investors come, they would come if you have the best educated, and the cost of labor is cheap. That's why they would come. But if they come and they find out that, hey, your workforce is not up to it, they will go, or they will bring others, which is the problem we are having. If you look at the telcos and so on, you know, whether it's Vodafone or MTN, initially they brought their own people. If you look at even construction, Jubilee House, there was an issue as to, you know, and so on. So we do have problems that the politicians must solve, the developmental problem. Good quality education. We have many more Ghanaian graduates now than we had in the 60s. So education is going on. But the quality of education is questioned by almost everybody, including our own Ghanaians, whether they are in the banks, whether they are in the police, whether they are in the civil service, whether they are in some industries and so on. They said, hey, what quality is this? These are the things that parties focus on solving because they have taken over the mandate and they've been given the state, they are agents of the state. And if you read the directive principles of state policy, the parties have such challenging responsibilities in moving the nation forward, including sustained economic growth, higher growth, job creation. You know, we have to be prosperous. We have to be more, equity has to be what drives.
And that's a role the party has to play?
Yes, because they take the agency of the state.
I mean,
they are elected to govern. Minister, president, chief executive.
So once they've given you the ministers and the president, I thought the party would then, you know, move on to the ground and say, look, now let's keep them in power. They can go and do that developmental agenda.
It's wrong. Why the parties are doing that uncontrollably is that we haven't looked at the framework. You see, the parties now behave as if they are over and above the state because they come to control the state. And they want to use the state in some really questionable ways, which is weakening the institutions. But the party must be interested in governing, especially in the rule of law. You know, that says that we will enforce the laws because we want a strong and secure country where the law, and it's important for even the foreign investments they are looking for. The parties must be interested in building strong institutions that can help them rapidly develop the country, attain higher growth, and see the distribution of wealth and see the mobilization of resources and so on. And they have to think it through. That is what will secure their longevity in government and so on and so forth. Now they lack the capacity to do that. They don't have, because partially we kept them out of going into local government, where you begin to, it's like the crucible, you know, the development laboratory. You have to go and work with people and solve their problems, and you have to talk to people. You are talking to civil servants. You are talking maybe the central government, the president is not from your party, but you need resources to take care of Ghanaians in your district and so on. There's a national program you have to implement, but you also have peculiar needs. The politics of bargaining and negotiating, we don't have. It's my turn. And to the extent that they are militant supporters, you know, the parties have invested so much on militants because of the nature of the competition, especially as the two parties became what we call geopolitics.
Let me take a quick break here because I want to look at funding and I want to look at militants.
Okay.
Yeah, so let me take a quick break here. When I come back, I want to look at the way we fund parties and the way we use militants as these boys and those boys. We're coming straight back.
The vigilantes, you mean?
Well, thank you very much for staying. 998 presidential staffers, political recruitment, overblowing of expanding our budget. But let's hear what Mustafa Hamid had to say with the question of the numbers of the presidency.
In the case of free SHS, one district, one factory, etc., national youth employment, all of those matters, these will go, at least they will become permanent features of our national bureaucratic arrangement, at least in the period that MPP is in office, unless of course another government wants to come and perhaps abolish free senior high school or refuse to pursue the national innovative plan and so on and so forth. So these are more permanent arrangements, and therefore the people that are co-opted, or even if you want employed to work on these projects, would have to stay on for as long as these projects, are beneficial to the Ghanaian people. That's the difference. So you could have also asked that, why is it that you would have to have another 100 set of people working to host World Press Freedom Day when you have a Ministry of Information or you have an Information Services Department? But everybody who is in the Information Services Department and the Ministry of Information have their daily schedules already.
But already we have questions have been raised about the productivity levels and the effectiveness of staff at MDAs. So Ghanaians have raised a lot of questions about, for instance, the departments that interface with the public. You go to a place like Passport Office, DVLA, a lot of questions have been raised about the efficiency. Okay, so already we have a public service, a civil service that has its issues. If you set up another infrastructure to deal with key programs, why not beef up the capacity of these persons who are already there and who, experts have raised that there are questions about their effectiveness and their productivity?
Well, again, I would also use your submission as the basis to also justify our position that if indeed the submission is correct, that people believe that the bureaucratic institutions that are in existence are ineffectual and that people are not working properly and so on. If it is true that they are not working, then it will be, as for want of a better term, foolhardy to add all these other programs to the brief that.
Justification.
So what's he saying exactly? Are the people who are in now going to replace the civil servants or do better than them? Then it becomes a matter of how do they get in. You see, the presidency.
Well, they're saying they have I think he's saying they have specific programs, and therefore they have specific people.
But are they directing everything from Jubilee House, from the seat of the presidency? You see, the president, to get close, the president needs to be surrounded by highly competent people, because he has a certain time limit to do things, and he wants the best, first class, knowledgeable, and so on. So the people who come around him or are in his offices, it's not the quantity, but the quality of people, and their tested ability to deliver what he wants. Speak to other segments of the population, or pursue follow-up on what is happening, or strategic areas where he needs to really get more action going and results and so on and so forth. But the civil service is the principal instrument for the government to govern, the public service as well, the local government service. And we are going to come to that. Now we don't see it clearly because we are saying there is maybe some deficiencies in competence or mistrust between public servants and them and so on. But the solution is not also adding up, because we can't be sure that the numbers added are more competent or are being more efficient than those who were there already as civil career professionals who've gone through the process. So what is the agenda? I think there's this looseness, but is the system and the way it's designed, that is also part of the problem. We believe, for instance, that the day the president, in fact, the positive decision that he needs to be commended about, that he's going to open local government to the parties, and that means that he's ceding the appointive powers he has for chief executives and 30% of assemblies, all over, to parties elected. Now, the day that happens, you ask yourself, how is the president, whose policies needs to be governed, implemented throughout the country now, going to have that kind of, because can he leave everything entirely to the political parties from different sections, including those who are in opposition, or because opposition people would also be in local government. And I think increasingly the president role as the president of the country, the president whose critical task is the development of the whole country, would also be expressed in the efficient machinery of the state that he can use. So the presidents, our future presidents, starting from our current president, might take greater interest in building a more efficient and competent public service, professional, meritocratic. It's happening in other countries. Incidentally, it's not only Ghana. In fact, Mauritius is the only country now where most references are made about how they recruit on the basis of merit. You go through exams, your promotion is based on exams, your performance, you are assessed critically, and so on. But they are also well paid. They are amongst the best paid in the country. And very few people actually get in, because the processes of getting into the public service are quite rigorous, you know, and so on. But now it is not, because sometimes you hear how people are pushed into the public service who probably are not the best qualified. And so they can't do the job.
So that's what brings me to my question just before the break. The way we fund parties and how we use foot soldiers. So eventually when you win, I mean, this is the results we get. And until we stop funding and stop using foot soldiers, we have no choice.
Foot soldiers and vigilantes would always be part of the parties, because party is a broad church, you know, and they also need the votes. And the foot soldiers' votes are as valuable as the, you know, the elites, you know, because they are in the majority, and it's a majority vote, so they would need them. Party funding would always be important, but probably we need to look at the regulatory framework. We have taken, you know, just taken our eye off, and we haven't really interrogated how our parties funded and what are the implications. Because those who finance them also control the parties. In fact, they own the parties. Now, in the situation in Ghana, all the parties, MPP, NDC, and all the minority parties and so on, they don't get membership subscription of any significance. And yet, look at what goes into elections. And they don't do very much party education. Their manifestos practically after elections are thrown away. They don't translate them. They don't educate their members consistently to understand the policies of their own president or candidate who's been elected as the president of Ghana, and so on. So we ought to take interest. How are they financed? You see, and what are the implications? Where do the laws are there, they are not enforced. But after elections, parties also operate. They have to operate now as development organizations. And elections money does not extend to those who finance them, are less interested in the kind of things that the parties want to do to solve grassroots support. Many of them want their monies quickly. So you find out that all the big parties we've had in government focus a lot of infrastructure development and procurement. You see, and that means that these are the areas that they are also able to make quick money. There was a time the World Bank said road construction in Ghana is amongst the highest, you know, in terms of cost. It's such a high cost, and it probably amongst the top range in the world. But our roads too don't last anyway. And we've done something, but it's not enough, given what we earn in 25 and so on. So you look at road construction, you look at hospitals, you look at railways or power and so on. These are the areas that the Lord has done. But the kind of development you want to see in the communities where people's living standards are improving, and you go throughout the country, you see the evenness of the residential, the habitat, you know, the settlements.
We're focusing too much on procurement?
Yes, yes, because that is where quick money is made. That's why, for instance, if you take the office of the special prosecutor, yes, they're talking about procurement issues. I mean, one of the important achievements that the president has spoken about is that they've been able to reduce the money spent on procurement. Yes. With the procedures they've laid and so on, and that is being diverted into other areas of investment.
On the same subject, let's get Franklin Kujo, president of Imani, so civil society. What's their take on the size of the presidential staffs?
It's too large.
And I'm not too sure if the 1,000 figure is the final figure, because don't forget, the development belts or authorities that have been established, which will be staffed appropriately. And so that figure itself, at a particular point in time, may not be the final figure. Having said that, I think we need to also go back in time and ask ourselves what the party itself and its leadership, the current party in government, what they said of previous administrations. It is not as if previous administrations were anything saintly, but there was a common decent understanding that we couldn't have been padding the numbers at the office of the president and the office of government machinery. So we need to understand that there is a basis for this conversation, even if the Constitution has not guaranteed a ceiling. At least there is a basis. The other point I need to make clearly is that I'm wondering what 276 junior political officers are doing at the Flagstaff House. Because I've looked through the list, and some of them, I know them. Most of them were Facebookers making noise on Facebook. I don't know whether it was a reward. But again, how do we have 48 technical advisors? What is happening at the Flagstaff House? Now you need 24 technical advisors and 24 deputy technical advisors. Presumably, if it was an efficient entity, you probably need much less.
Okay, but government insists that this 998 figure, you will not find all of them at the Jubilee House. But you've been working the numbers. But you've been working the numbers, Franklin. Let's move on, Franklin. You've been working the numbers. How many have you come up with unofficially so far?
No, let's deal with matters first. Let's not rush the interview. The point about not all of them working at the Flagstaff House is untenable. Nobody has said that they all wake up in the morning and go to the Flagstaff House. That's not the point. Otherwise, if there's the case, some of the regional coordinating councils and the leadership that report to the president don't reside at the Flagstaff House. So it's an untenable argument. The question as to what I've found is also a bit moot. You see, right now as we speak, the figure that was submitted is not the current figure as we speak. It was at the point in time in the year, I think last year. As we speak, I'm submitting to you that that number will be increasing because the Ministry for Special Development Initiative, which is of course, the House for the Special Development Belt, would now have new recruits, and that will add up to the numbers. So I think we need to have a conversation as to what exactly constitutes government efficiency. As you realize, Davi was asking in the morning, what is the productivity returns of all these numbers? And those are the questions we need to ask.
That's a position of Imani. You can agree with some of his
Well,
points?
I said it. I said productivity. What you see, if we have 1,000 people, and we can also prove that actually the value of the work they do generates much more than is spent on them, then it's something then we can say, okay, it's worth it. But if not, and exactly what are they doing becomes an issue. And do they really have the competencies to do the job? That will say the president's agenda is moving forward quickly, it's impacting, we are seeing results, and so on and so forth. To the extent that they are not having that kind of high level of productivity, and they are not improving, growth, and the economy is not stronger, and distribution, problems are not being solved, and so on. You want to then ask, what happened to decentralization? You see,
I don't know if there's a silver bullet, but maybe silver bullets. How do we start to make sure that, look, this political job for the boys, unnecessary recruitment, slows down or stops? What do we do?
First of all, I think that it's going to take some time to change it, but the president, I think, has taken the important decisions. As he's opening local government to parties are going to be immersed in local development, and they'll be hungry for people with competence to deliver, because there's going to be competition, even amongst chief executives elected from the same party, because whatever the ambitions, and they're going to need more money. But if you're getting more money and you want to quickly show that you have not just developed a road, you've built some agro industry or provided facilities or created the conditions to attract more investors and so on. And the local economic development is going to be central to what parties achieve and their claim to power. In some of the districts, I mean, we are unevenly developed across the country, so it will vary. But in that case, they are going to need respect competence. Now, you don't respect competence much, okay? Because the trust of the game is that the financiers also set the agenda. And it's quick money. And people have the notion that because I campaigned for the president, I'm entitled. You know, and whatever, by the time I leave office, you had people who had targets of 1 million before they left office or whatever. So this is the politics that is going to change with the reform he's embarking on. By the way, just amending the constitution does not immediately take you into parties, into local government. There are a whole lot of reforms. The parties currently lack the capacity to go into local government to run economies, run the economy, you know, see to agricultural development, the policies that will be the differentiation, which country districts have what resources that immediately they could invest in to create jobs and so on. These are a whole lot. But in doing that, we also have to put the framework in place to now regulate the parties, build their capacity, invest in their capacity to be development. But we also have to regulate. We have to take interest in.
Like a Bank of Ghana of parties? Like
a Bank of Ghana. Every institution, every sector of the economy has a regulator. Why are the political parties who are not civil society, they are usually called political societies? No, the EC is elections, and they will challenge the EC if it goes beyond this election administration mandate. So, and the parties do development. That's what I was saying. Okay. So who oversees the parties' behavior and conduct and business after elections? Nobody. Yes, and we need that. I mean, if we need a governor, a central bank to regulate private banks where people have invested, and we are saying we are doing that because it's in the public interest. Those who deposit their monies must be given the assurance, or if something goes wrong, it will affect the government. Either they are going to compensate, like you have with some of these microfinance companies that, you know, go bust and a whole lot. People then demand monies from government. It's not only that, how mismanagement in these banks could also affect the entire economy, macroeconomic stability and so on. So government goes in. Now, what is the behavior? What is the behavior of the parties that affects running of the economy, affects corruption, affects accountable governance, affects the weakening of our institutions, and our failure to make sure that as our democracy is stable, our accountable government is stable, and we are seeing real development flourishing across the countries? It's the parties who get the mandate to do that, and they are not performing that function well. So we need to look at the regulation thing, but it has to be done with them. Just like electoral reforms was done with them. You have to sit and say, how do you build strong civil service? How do you grow the economy? How do we fight crime? How do we resolve the issues on good quality health care and so on and so forth? These are things, is the next phase. And I think we are all moving there because we are looking at how we can transform our economy and our society in the next 25 years or something. So the parties have a role to play there.
Wow, what a deep conversation. Just started with over-bloated staff at the presidency, and you find out that once you peel off the layers, is one after the other, that causes it. And I think we need to sit down and go the right direction. But in all accounts, it looks like there's just one too many people connected to the presidency. Thank you very much, Dr. Akwetey, Executive Director of IDEC.
Thank you.
Tomorrow we'll be back to do this all over again. Thank you for watching.
Okay. You can see I'm in a hurry to go.